Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Editor of the New Age, I wish to thank Transnet as well for sponsoring this one. Thanks very much. It's a wonderful thing to see you all here. We think it's important because land is such an important thing. And if we don't get it right, everything else will fall apart. So thanks very much for that. You know, I was looking at stories which have been written about land, particularly looking at the 1913 Natives Land Act because of the theme. Now, this theme was developed by the team in the department. Just want to read something here, just briefly, to read it to you, because it is very relevant to today's discussion. You know, I read this thing from a book written by two wonderful people, wonderful South African, Miller and Pope. But they quote one South African historian, Rodney Davenport, who once taught at Rhodes University. Davenport and Hunt write the following: the Natives Land Act imposed a policy of territorial segregation with a heavy hand. It aimed specifically to get rid of those features of African land ownership and sharecropping, which white farmers found undesirable, and enlarge reserves to ease congestion and facilitate the recruiting of labor for the mines. Now, according to them, its primary role as a segregating measure, the Act commenced the monstrous unfairness which was to be the norm for most of the remainder of the century. Now, that's the Land Act. Now we are where we are today because of it and other laws which were promulgated by the apartheid regime, having formalized what was achieved through war. Now, but we are a constitutional democracy. We have to correct that which was done to us unjustly by just means. This is a challenge, and this is what LECHESA, the Deputy Minister, would refer to as creative tension between the two. Correcting what was done unjustly and through war by constitutional means in a democratic state. So it's a challenge. Now, some South Africans, as a result of this, have a lot of land, others don't. 10 years ago, we told often, particularly by farmers who are in the eye of the storm, if you like, we are told that 10 years ago, you had about 70,000 white commercial farmers producing 90% of food in the country. 90,000. But today, we're told again that you have between 35,000 and 37,000. It means you have massive concentration, because that does not reflect deconcentration of ownership. It actually reflects deepening of concentration of ownership. That is unsustainable. So what do? We are proposing because we looked at why is it important that we, in correcting that, in trying to reverse that. Remember that perhaps people might think we are naive when we say reversing it. We know it can be reversed, but we have to do something about it to correct the wrongs of the past. Now, what do? We are proposing, as government, we are proposing that we actually review the tenure system in the country. But listen to this. Listen to this about tenure. Now, they say here, these authors, the circumstances which give rise to any system of land tenure are, of course, integral to its history. Land tenure in any given epoch necessarily starts from the first acquisition. That is the circumstances which put the state in a position to allocate rights in land. In the particular case of South Africa, the reforms of the present era are by way of rectifying the wrongs of the immediate past era, which, of course, must necessarily be viewed in the appropriate historical context. And that context we know. Now, The test, therefore, of the land tenure reform that we are introducing in the country has to speak to that history, the history of dispossession of black people by white people, who constitute a small number in terms of the total population of South Africa. That's what it is all about. Therefore, when we propose the 4-tier land tenure system and emphasizing the first three, state land, we're saying, let us stabilize the land market in the country. State land, therefore, leasehold. It's a strategy, it's not a principle, it's a strategy. Secondly, we say privately owned land, it must be freehold, but with limited extent, what people refer to as land ceilings. Land doesn't grow, population grows. So you've got to find a just, as the Constitution will say, a just and equitable manner of redistributing land such that in South Africa there's peace and stability. Thirdly, land owned by foreign nationals in South Africa. We say that also is freehold, but precarious tenure, because there has to be obligations and conditions, with which they must abide. Because we are a country in transition, or society in transition, they must abide by that. But lastly, communal land. We say it's communal tenure with institutionalized use rights, so that people can use land or the portion of land they own in communal area as collateral. It must be willable. So we must institutionalize those use rights. That's what we're saying about land insofar as that. But finally, Peter, we're saying you had the 87%, 13% split as a result of this law. So part of what we want to do, we want to reverse that by resettling people from the 13% to the 87% of the land. We have to do that because we have to realize that 1913 Natives Land Act did not only affect very, very harshly humans, it also impacted negatively on the environment. Deforestation, land degradation because of overpopulation, overgrazing. You need to decongest the 13% by relocating people into the 87%. And that's what the president was talking about when he said we need to have district committees. Those district committees of farmers and people and other people who are interested in land should be able to sit and look at these 13% and say, who has demonstrated commitment, passion, and ability to farm despite limited resources and no support at all from the state, and select those people and put them in the land in the 87% so that we can decongest there and allow for regreening of that environment. We allow for rehabilitation of the soil there. That's part of land reform. That's part of dealing with the legacy of 1913 Natives Land Act. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Thank you for taking a seat. A few